This is a true story of passengers who survived a plane crash carrying 40 passengers and 5 crew members. Their plane was stranded in the Andes Mountains. While they were stranded, a food crisis ensued and they had to eat their dead friends to survive. What is their story? Will they live or surrender? Prepare your favorite snacks and drinks because the story is about to begin. A plane will fly to Santiago with 40 passengers and 5 cabin crew. Inside the plane there are various professions ranging from baseball players, lawyers, doctor, and mechanic. On the plane there is a conversation about turbulence. One of the cabin crew said that if the warm water from Argentina meets the cold mountain air, it will cause a suction effect. That is the cause of turbulence. Indeed, their plane will pass through the vast Andes Mountains, but there are other ways to avoid it. Among other things, usually the plane circles the mountain then crosses through the south where there is a mountain gap, and that's where there's no turbulence. At that time the weather forecast said, the weather at that time of heart was absolutely no snowstorm or rain. The report said the weather was very good, but in reality there was extreme weather. Instantly panic set in. A cabin crew member was bounced up and down after disciplining one of the passengers. The wind was so strong that the plane had to increase power to reach the top of the mountains, so that when it arrived at the top there was no more wind. All passengers could only pray that they would survive. Until finally, when going to the top of the plane's power was not enough, so the plane crashed and split in two. The back was left behind while the front of the plane passed the summit. The first and third days were not much different. They only made improvements inside the plane to make it more spacious, taking the leftover food stored in the suitcases, hoping to get enough food, until finally they had to endure the cold. Death and life coexisted at that time. They might have survived the crash, but they might not have survived that night. There were 11 people who died, 2 critical, and 1 broken bone. Several planes passed by, happy to be evacuated, but no reinforcements arrived for a long time. Numa, one of the surviving passengers, said that he was informed that there was a battery in the back of the plane, which could be used to power the radio. They tried this and climbed to the top. Before they reached the top, they looked back. It turned out that the reason the plane did not see them was because their plane was covered with snow if seen from afar. They had not eaten for 7 days while the food supply had run out. Hunger and cold were what they felt at that time. Until the worst situation, their urine was pitch black. A dilemma arose, whether they would wait for the SAR team to arrive while their situation was worrying, or they would survive by becoming cannibals. The discussion is contradictory for some people. Some involve the law, some are related to religion, and some are really unable to. It's not a matter of law, legal or otherwise, but how to survive until help arrives. At that time a decision could not be made, so they took whatever they could find to eat. While there they could only watch their friends die one by one. They had been there for 9 days, and the hunger was getting worse. Marcelo is an optimist who wants to wait for the SAR team without eating anything. Not everyone has thoughts like him, but everyone has a stomach to fill. A piece of glass was used as a knife to cut the corpse. The end of the wait came when someone found a suitcase containing a radio and repaired it. How surprised they were to hear the news that the search for the crashed plane had been stopped, and it was also rumored that all passengers were declared dead. Hearing that news, despair was the best way, and waited until death. Hearing this news made Numa, Gustavo, Maspan. Silently they climbed without any equipment. After climbing the hill they found the wreckage of the tail of the plane. There were several victims, and they continued their journey. But instead of good things they got a bad luck. In the middle of the night a snowstorm came. Without any equipment they could only hug each other for warmth. After the storm was over, Gustavo was left permanently blind, and Numa was left weak because he had no food to eat. It was already the 17th day they were in the wreckage of the plane. When the anxiety about food was resolved, now a new problem came back. Suddenly a rumbling sound came from above and a snowstorm hit their plane. The entire cabin of the plane was filled with snow, and now the wreckage was completely invisible. Now the death toll increased again. Liliana, Diego, Roque, Maspans, Enrique, Juan Carlos, Coco and Marcelo were trapped at the bottom of the cabin. Inside the wreckage of the plane they had been there all night, buried under the high snow. Hunger was unstoppable. There was no other choice but to eat the corpses in front of their eyes. A piece of glass was used by Daniel to cut, and the part was shared by Fido. On the 36th day, the expedition to find help and logistics began, the 4 of them with mature equipment left. Among them were Nando, Numa, Roberto, Roy. But on the way, Numa's injured leg turned out to be infected. As a result, Numa had to return alone to the headquarters. Along with the departure of the 4 of them, Vasco and Arturo, who were injured, have now died. Arriving at the wreckage of the tail of the plane, They searched for airplane batteries and repaired communication devices, looking for extra food, clothes, and supporting cables. Going back and forth just to fix the communication system didn't help at all. They had been there for 61 days. A message was placed on the tail of the airplane in case help came to that part first. But Numa's condition worsened as the infection spread to his back, and he said that when he died, his body was ready to be used for the safety of his friends. And the next day she was gone. Shortly before he died, Numa wrote a letter to the survivors saying, "There is no greater love than that of a man who lays down his life for his friend." Seeing his friend's passing, Roberto invited Nando and another colleague to venture out in search of help. Fernando Hernando, who was expected to die due to a severe injury to his eye, now had a strong determination to get out of the Andes Mountains. He has lost enough, his mother and sister who died in his arms. Every day he trains step by step in the snow so that he can lead his friends out of the mountains. Equipped like professional climbers, they used makeshift tools such as old clothes, sticks from a plane wreck and a few pieces of meat to stock up for a week. Arriving at the top of the hill, they thought they would get the answers to their questions, but all they could see were snowy hills. Nando turned out to be an optimist. During their conversation at the top, he tried to convince Roberto, who had started to give up on the situation and intended to return to his home country headquarters. Over and over again trying to provide that behind the hills there was life, Roberto finally agreed to cross the hills with Nando, but it took 10 to 12 days to pass, while their food stock could only last up to 7 days. A decision was made. The Panchos who had previously participated must now return to the headquarters. With the return of the Panchos to the base, Nando and Roberto's food stock would be sufficient for 12 days. Upon arrival at the plane, Panchos told them what he saw at the top and told them that there was great hope for survival. Before they knew it, they had been climbing for 9 days, and on the 10th day they arrived at the foot of a hill with no snow at all. There they spent the night and started a fire. With a weak and unhealthy condition, they both fought for the safety of themselves and their friends who were still trapped. The next day they finally found a source of water. Like people who never drink, they brutally drank as much water as they could drink. But to Nando's surprise, he saw an iguana right in front of his eyes, which meant there was life around them. But to Roberto's even greater surprise, he saw a man riding a horse across the river. The man was surprised to see Nando and Roberto, which is why he was yelling at him. And the man did not hit the 2 survivors of the plane. Trying to communicate, but the water conditions were high enough that it was not possible to cross it. So the man tied a paper and stationery into a rock and threw it to the 2 of them. With a very happy heart, Nando wrote that contains, "I am a victim of a plane crash in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. 10 days we walked. There are still 14 more people on the plane. We want to leave here quickly, but we are stuck. We have no food. We are weak. When will the rescue team come? Please, even walking is difficult. Where are we?" As soon as the news that there were still survivors on the plane, the local government was excited and reported it to the military base to ask for help evacuating the remaining victims. In those days, information was still disseminated by radio. While in the Andes Mountains, Roberto was able to repair the radio, and from the radio broadcast news about passengers who were declared dead and will soon be picked up. Officially on the 71st day, 2 helicopters were flown to the Andes and Fernando joined them as navigator. Their feelings of joy, excitement and gratitude were palpable. It was all a miracle. The government had stopped the search and assumed they were dead. They were taken by helicopter and left behind the place of their toughest memories, the place where life and death coexisted, the place where they watched their friends die and ate to survive. It will be an incredible story for their next generation. Leaving for Chile on October 13th and successfully evacuated on December 12th, they survived for over a month without proper food. Out of 40 passengers, only 16 survived. Upon arrival at the hospital, they were greeted like VIP guests. With long hair, dirty faces, thin and dry bodies that were sunburned and very weak, they were bathed and given all the food they wanted. The newspapers were buzzing about us as heroes of the Andes. Those who escaped death joined their fathers, mothers, girlfriends, and children.